The accident didn't take her life, but it took the one she knew. Alina's heart had always been in motion. As a travel photographer, she'd spent years tracing wild mountain edges, chasing golden light through city alleys and misty forests. She was the kind of person who filled rooms with wind, unpredictable, free, with eyes always scanning the horizon for the next shot, the next story. Until a winter road in Iceland stole the strength from her legs. Now home in a quiet corner of Maine, her life had shrunk to the span of her porch, her hospital bed, her physical therapy schedule. Her world had narrowed to a single question: would she ever walk again? The doctors were optimistic. She was young, healthy, and the spinal injury wasn't complete. But optimism felt like a cruel kind of hope to someone whose independence had been stripped in a single moment. "I'm not who I used to be," she told her sister one evening, her voice low as a slow snowfall fell outside. "I don't know who I am like this." Her sister didn't respond. She just reached across the worn quilt, laced their fingers, and stayed. On her first day back at outpatient therapy, Alina met him. He wasn't the first therapist she'd worked with. After months of rehab, she'd seen a rotating team of professionals. But something about him made her sit straighter in her chair, even as pain lanced through her hips. "Alina," he said, stepping into the room with quiet confidence. She looked up. He was tall, in his late 30s maybe, with sleeves rolled up to his elbows and a calmness that didn't press but steadied. His name tag read, Aidan Lowry, DPT. "I'll be working with you for the next several months," he said, "if that's all right with you." She studied him for a long beat, unsure why her throat felt tight. "Yeah, that's fine." Aidan didn't treat her like glass. He adjusted the height of the parallel bars, listened when she said a stretch was too much, and didn't flinch when she lost her temper midway through a balance exercise and knocked over a tray of resistance bands. He just picked them up silently, handed her one without a word, and waited until she was ready. Later in the car, she cried without knowing why. Aidan had been a therapist for over a decade. He'd worked in VA hospitals, in small-town clinics in the aftermath of disasters both natural and personal. He'd seen people fight for every inch of recovery, and he'd learned not to take their anger personally. Pain wore many masks. But Alina was different. She showed up even when she didn't want to. She fought like she wanted to disappear and survive all at once. There was a shadow in her that moved just behind her resilience, grief perhaps, or something heavier. One day, after a particularly brutal session where she managed to take 6 steps unaided before collapsing onto the mat, he handed her a towel and said, "That was brave." She didn't look at him. It was pathetic. "It was progress," he corrected, "and you're allowed to hate it, but don't lie to yourself about what it means." She met his gaze then, and something flickered between them. Not desire, not yet, but recognition. As if he saw the version of her she still didn't believe existed. The more time they spent together, the harder it became to maintain the line. Not professionally, Aidan was careful, always professional. But emotionally, Alina found herself carrying the shape of his voice home, hearing it in the quiet of her nights. He asked thoughtful questions about her photography. He remembered things she said offhand, the name of her cat, her favorite coffee order, the fact that she used to hike in the mornings before the world woke up. She told herself it was nothing. A good therapist noticed things. But when he caught her once just as her knees buckled, and she instinctively gripped his forearm and held on longer than necessary, the air shifted. Not in a way either of them acknowledged aloud, but in how her hand trembled, and how he steadied her with both hands at her waist before stepping back too quickly. In the 3rd month of her therapy, Alina stood on her own for a full minute. Aidan watched from his usual crouch nearby, ready to catch her, his hands hovering just inches from her thighs. "You did it," he said, quiet and sure. She laughed, breathless. "I'm still standing." "You are." She sat down abruptly, overwhelmed. Tears came before she could stop them, hot and uninvited. Aidan offered her a bottle of water but didn't speak. When she finally wiped her face and looked at him, he said, "You're not broken, Alina. I know it feels that way, but you're not." She swallowed. "I was never good at being vulnerable. Being strong doesn't mean you have to carry it alone." She didn't say anything else, but she carried those words home like a talisman. Winter melted into early spring. On a morning when the daffodils first broke through the soil, Aidan arrived to find Alina already inside the gym, stretching without being prompted. "Look at you," he said, half teasing. She grinned. "Don't get used to it." But there was something light in her voice, something that hadn't been there before. It was cautious but present, like the first color returning to her grayscale life. They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm of progress slow and steady. And then she said, "Do you ever get tired of watching people learn how to move again?" He looked up serious. "No, every person is different, every story matters." She nodded, then added, "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to start over?" Aiden hesitated. "I think most people do, whether they admit it or not." Alina studied him. "What made you become a therapist?" He didn't answer right away. Then softly, "My brother was injured in Afghanistan. I saw how much his therapist helped him, not just physically but emotionally. It gave him his life back." "Is he okay now?" "He's gone, suicide 3 years ago." Alina exhaled, "I'm sorry." "My too." They didn't say much after that, but something changed between them. A small mutual ache, a bridge. Later that week, Alina had a nightmare. She woke up gasping, the echo of twisted metal and blinding ice flashing in her mind. Her legs ached. Her chest felt hollow. She didn't want to burden anyone, but before she could stop herself, she reached for her phone and texted Aiden. "I'm sorry it's late, just needed to say it's been a hard night." She didn't expect a response. It was nearly midnight. But a few minutes later, her phone lit up. "You're not alone, do you want to talk?" She stared at the screen, then replied, "Not really, but thanks." Another pause. "Okay, I'll just be here, sleep if you can, breathe, one moment at a time." She fell asleep holding her phone in her hand. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel entirely alone inside the dark. The next morning, Alina noticed the world felt marginally softer, like a sharp edge had been sanded down in her sleep. She didn't bring up the message when she saw Aiden at the clinic. She wasn't sure how to, or even if she should. But there was a moment, brief, wordless, when he met her eyes during a warm-up stretch and she felt the echo of that late-night silence settle between them again. Not awkward, not expectant, just a quiet understanding. She carried it with her, tucked somewhere close to her ribs. Weeks passed, her gait was still uneven and her muscles trembled after short walks, but she no longer hated her reflection in the studio mirrors. There were days when she laughed again, even cracked a joke about being a half-bionic woman. She still cried, still woke up stiff and afraid some mornings, but her world no longer felt like it was made entirely of aftershock. One morning, as she limped across the room with only a single cane, she caught Aiden smiling to himself. "What?" she asked. He shook his head. "You're going to outgrow me soon." She arched a brow. "You trying to get rid of me?" "No," he said gently, "just proud." The words landed deeper than she expected. Not because she needed his approval, but because it felt like the kind of pride that came from truly seeing someone. And Alina hadn't felt truly seen in a very long time. Outside the clinic, the town was shaking off winter. The sidewalks were slushed with half-melted snow, and storefront windows were decorated with hopeful signs of spring, planter boxes, pastel flyers for farmers markets, and a bench Aiden helped restore for the clinic's front entrance. One afternoon, after an intense session, he walked her out to her car. The sidewalk was slick in places, and she moved with extra caution. He stayed close but didn't hover. "You ever think about photography again?" he asked. She gave a small shrug. "Sometimes, but I don't think I could go back to it, not the way I used to. It was all movement, climbing, running, chasing light." "Maybe it could be something new," he offered. "Still yours, just different." Alina leaned against the passenger door, catching her breath. "I wouldn't even know how to start." Aiden hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded flyer. "There's a local show coming up, community photography, amateurs mostly, theme is stillness, I thought of you." She took the flyer, the paper soft from his pocket. The date was 2 months away. "You want me to submit something?" she asked, unsure whether to laugh or retreat. "I want you to consider it," he said, "that's all." She didn't say yes, but she didn't throw the flyer away either. That night, Alina opened her old hard drives for the first time since the accident. There were thousands of images, waterfalls caught mid-crash, street vendors in Vietnam laughing behind clouds of steam, a child in Morocco spinning under a kite. There was a life inside these frames, a woman she once was. But it wasn't until she found a series she'd taken on a foggy morning in the Scottish Highlands, just her boots, mist, and the outline of a single, stilled tree, that she felt something click. Stillness. She sent it to the show's submission email without much ceremony. Then closed her laptop and sat in the dark, heart racing in a way she hadn't expected. She told no one, not even Aiden. As March slid into April, Alina's progress began to stall. She hit a plateau and no amount of therapy could push her beyond it. Her frustration returned with sharp teeth. She snapped at herself, at her sister, once at Aiden. He stayed steady, he always did. One morning, after she failed yet again to hold her balance on a step-up platform, she flung the foam block across the room and muttered, "Maybe I'm just not meant to be whole again." Aiden crossed the room, not to pick up the block but to crouch beside her. "You are whole," he said. "You've always been. Recovery doesn't make you more or less." Eleanor kept her eyes on the floor. "I feel like I'm stuck halfway between the person I was and someone I don't recognize." He nodded, quiet for a moment. "Maybe that's exactly where you're supposed to be right now, between becoming." The words didn't fix everything, but they rooted somewhere inside her. One Saturday afternoon, Eleanor wandered into the community gallery. She told herself it was just to look, just to see what the space felt like. But there it was on the back wall, printed and framed, "Fog, Isle of Skye, Eleanor Hart." She stood staring at it, pulse pounding in her ears when someone approached. "It's haunting," a woman said beside her, but in a peaceful way. Eleanor smiled without turning, "Thanks." After the woman drifted away, Eleanor took a photo of the image on her phone and, without overthinking it, sent it to Aiden. "I submitted, didn't tell you, guess I was afraid I'd back out, but it's there." His reply came fast. "Proud doesn't even begin to cover it." And for the first time, the word didn't feel foreign. It felt like sunlight finding a place it hadn't touched in months. 2 days later, he asked if she wanted to get coffee. "Outside of therapy." "No pressure," he added quickly. "I know this could be crossing a line and I'll never put you in an uncomfortable spot, but I thought maybe you'd like something that was work." Eleanor stared at him, surprised. "I thought therapists weren't supposed to date patients," she said, more curious than defensive. "They aren't, but you're not my patient much longer. Your chart's closing next week." Her heart flipped, but she kept her voice even. "Coffee, then." He smiled. "I'll pick a place with wide walkways and good seating." She laughed, surprised by how much that one sentence meant. Care didn't always need to be dramatic. Sometimes it lived in details. They met at a little cafe on the edge of town. It was quiet, filled with the smell of roasted beans and old wood. Eleanor arrived first, nervous and uncertain, her cane tapping softly against the floor. When Aiden walked in, he looked both exactly the same and different. Without his scrubs, in jeans and a navy sweater, he seemed softer, more human. Not the man who helped her learn to stand again, but the one who waited in midnight text threads, who saw stillness as a beginning instead of an end. They talked for hours about photography, about grief, about the strange way life breaks and builds you at the same time. Eleanor told him about the way the accident stole her silence, how every quiet moment afterward had felt threatening, like it might swallow her whole. "I thought maybe if I stopped moving, I'd disappear," she said. Aiden reached for her hand across the table, gently. "You never disappeared, you just paused." The moment stretched between them, full of fragile wonder. When he walked her back to her car, the spring air was warm, and the sky stretched open in soft hues of lavender and gold. Aiden paused beside the driver's side and looked at her with that same steady gaze he'd always given her, even when she couldn't stand on her own. "I don't want to rush anything," he said, "but I care about you, Eleanor, more than I probably should." She didn't look away. "I'm not easy," she whispered. "I carry a lot. Some days I can barely carry myself." "Then let me carry some of it with you," he said. She felt her breath catch, not in fear, but in recognition. There was something here, not rescue, not romance built on fantasy, but something sturdier, something that could weather storms. She reached for his hand again, not to be helped but to hold. And for the first time since the accident, she didn't feel like a woman broken. She felt like a woman beginning. Eleanor hadn't kissed anyone since before the accident. Not that she hadn't had opportunities before her world fell apart, flirtations in foreign cities, a few brief but bright relationships, but she'd always been the one to keep her distance when things got too close. It was easier to love through a lens, to watch life unfold from behind a camera, always one step removed. But now, standing beside her car in the gentle hush of early evening, Aiden's hand warm in hers, she felt the truth humming through her in a way that had nothing to do with fear. It wasn't about rescue or salvation. It wasn't about being broken and someone else putting her back together. It was about being seen, about someone knowing her pain and not looking away. She stepped forward first. Not a dramatic moment, just a quiet tilt of her head, a breath of distance closing between them. He leaned in the rest of the way. The kiss was soft, unsure, and full of things neither of them had words for yet. When they parted, Aidan rested his forehead lightly against hers and said nothing. Sometimes silence held the loudest truths. They didn't make any declarations. There were no labels, no rushing forward into the blazing unknown, just slow steps, just careful choosing. Elinar's final day of therapy came with bittersweet edges. She completed her balance test with almost no wobble, walked the length of the clinic without her cane for the first time. Everyone clapped and she smiled politely, but she kept looking for Aidan. He stood in the back, hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression that didn't fit in any box. Pride, yes, but also something deeper, something like awe. After the congratulations, after the paperwork and the goodbyes, he walked her out. "So," he said, holding the door open as she stepped into the sunlight, "no more clinic, what now?" She looked at him, shielding her eyes. "Now I figure out how to live again, without the rails." He nodded. "You don't have to do it alone." She gave a small smile. "I don't want to." They started slowly. Weekend walks on the ocean path, where Alinar moved carefully over the gravel, breathing in the salt air and listening to Aidan talk about how he built furniture on the side, mostly to clear his head. He showed her a photo of a bookshelf he'd made with curved edges, like a wave frozen mid-break. "You're not just a physical therapist," she said, surprised. He chuckled. "I like giving things shape again, things that have lost it." They sat on a bench one evening, watching seagulls fight over discarded fries. Alinar leaned her head against his shoulder and closed her eyes. He didn't shift, just sat with her. She didn't realize until that moment how long it had been since she'd leaned on someone without apology. A few weeks later, she photographed her first new subject. Aidan was helping a neighbor repair an old barn roof, and Alinar tagged along, camera slung awkwardly over her shoulder. She hadn't touched it in months, and it felt foreign in her hands, like visiting the house of an old friend whose rhythm she'd forgotten. But when she saw Aidan framed in the dusky light, bent over a beam, sweat darkening the back of his shirt, she lifted the camera without thinking. The shutter clicked, and something settled inside her. He glanced down a moment later and caught her looking, smiled. "Did you just photograph me mid-struggle?" "I did." "Rude." "Real," she countered. And he laughed, the kind of laugh that cracked something open in her chest. Later, when she uploaded the image, she saw it differently than she'd expected. It wasn't just a photo of a man at work, it was a portrait of quiet strength, of someone building something with his hands while carrying things heavier than nails and wood. It was, without her planning it, a kind of love letter. Spring slipped fully into summer. The garden in Alinar's backyard, once overgrown and neglected, began to bloom again. With help from her sister and some cautious digging, she planted peonies and lavender. Aidan brought her wildflower seeds and helped her create a small path with smooth river stones, carefully spaced for her still-healing gait. Sometimes he'd stay late, not every night, not always with a reason. Once she found him asleep on her porch swing, the cat curled up beside him, soft light spilling from the kitchen window onto his face. She stood in the doorway and watched him for a moment, something warm and strange blooming in her chest. Not passion, not infatuation. Belonging. She stepped outside and sat beside him. He stirred, blinked at her. "Did I fall asleep?" "You did." He rubbed his eyes, sheepish. "Guess I'm too comfortable here." She looked at him. "Good." He reached for her hand, found it easily in the dark. But even the gentlest healing can be interrupted. One evening, Alinar received a call she hadn't expected. Her old photography editor from the magazine, a woman who, months ago, had assumed Alinar would never return. "We're doing a piece on recovery," she said. "A photo essay. No travel required, just local stories, people rebuilding. It made me think of you." Alinar listened in stunned silence. "I know it might be too soon," the editor added, "but you've always had an eye for what's human." Alinar promised to think about it. When she told Aidan, he smiled. "You should do it." "I'm scared." "That means it matters." "But what if I can't do it the way I used to?" "Then do it the way you are now." His faith in her didn't come with pressure, just space. And she realized, not for the first time, that he never tried to fix her, only walked beside her while she rebuilt herself. She accepted the assignment. Her first subject was a woman who'd opened a bakery after losing her husband. The second, a teenage boy with autism who found peace restoring bicycles. Alina photographed each of them with care, relearning her language through their resilience. She didn't photograph herself, but she didn't need to. Each image was a reflection of what she'd come through, of what she was still becoming. And Aiden was there, quiet in the background, bringing her water, holding her bag, helping her set up a tripod without being asked. One afternoon, after a long day of shooting, she leaned into him in the parking lot and whispered, "You carry things so gently." He rested his chin against her hair. "I learned from people who were breaking." "You're not afraid of that." "I'm only afraid of not showing up." She felt something in her heart ease open further, a door she hadn't realized was still closed. Later that summer, they took a day trip to the mountains. Alina had mentioned once that she missed the view from high up, how the wind tasted different, how the light touched everything with reverence. So Aiden found a lookout point with a paved path not too steep, just long enough to make her legs ache in the right way. They stopped halfway to rest. She looked out over the valley, breath heavy but full. "This feels like proof," she said softly. "Proof of what?" "That I'm still here." He looked at her then, eyes steady. "I never doubted that." She turned toward him, heart loud in her chest. "I used to think no one would ever love me again, not like this, not like I am now." His voice was low, full of certainty. "Then they never really saw you." Alina reached for his hand, felt the strength and steadiness in it, and knew he wasn't her healer, her savior, or her anchor. He was the man who walked beside her, through fire and doubt and blooming gardens. He carried her heart not because she couldn't anymore, but because she finally knew it was safe to let someone hold it. August came in soft and warm, the kind of golden stretch that made Maine feel timeless. Lazy cicada hum in the trees, wild blueberries staining fingertips, the hush of long twilight hours. Alina had never liked summers here before. She'd always left by June, chasing monsoons in Asia or festivals in far-off cities. But this summer was different. This summer she stayed. She learned the rhythm of her hometown again. The way the air smelled after a storm. The sound of the neighbors' screen doors opening and closing like quiet punctuation. And Aiden was there, folding into her days like something she hadn't known she needed, until it was simply part of her. They weren't living together, not exactly. But he kept leaving pieces of himself in her life. A mug in her cabinet, a pair of running shoes by the door, a book on her nightstand, spine cracked to a passage she later read aloud just to hear how his favorite words felt in her voice. One morning she caught him humming in her kitchen, flipping pancakes and wearing one of her old sweatshirts. The sight stopped her in the doorway. It wasn't grand, it wasn't cinematic. It was peace. And peace, for someone who had once woken up screaming, felt like the rarest kind of miracle. But healing isn't a straight line. Alina's editor called again, this time with something bigger. "We're putting together a feature for the fall issue, your recovery story, not just your subjects, you." Alina froze. "You want me to write it?" "Write it, photograph it, own it. You've been dancing around this story all year. Maybe it's time you stand in it." She hung up with her heart in her throat. Later, sitting on the back steps beside Aiden, she told him everything. "They want me to be the story," she said, "not what I've seen, not what I've framed me." He didn't flinch. "You've earned that." "I'm terrified." "You've done harder things." She looked at him, eyes sharp with unshed questions. "What if people see all of it, the accident, the rage, the depression? What if I don't know how to say it the right way?" Aiden took her hand, traced small circles on her palm. "Then just say it your way, the way you always do, with truth and softness, and the courage to let it be unfinished." Alina didn't answer right away, but that night she opened a new folder on her laptop, titled it Becoming, and began to write. Her words didn't come in a clean flow. They arrived in fragments, like shards of glass she had to turn over gently, deciding which parts could be touched and which still had edges. She wrote about the guilt of surviving when others hadn't, about how her sister had spoon-fed her soup when she couldn't lift her arms, about the nights she prayed not for healing but for numbness. She wrote about silence and pain and the first time she laughed again, the first time she stood, the first time she let someone see her cry without hiding behind a camera lens. She wrote about Aiden last. Not by name, not directly. Just the feeling of being held without being asked to explain. The kind of presence that made grief feel like something you didn't have to shoulder alone. When she was done, she didn't know if it was good, but it was honest. She sent it to her editor with shaking hands. And then she waited. During the weeks that followed, Alina and Aidan slipped into a new ease. The nervousness that had once surrounded their closeness faded, replaced by something steadier. They went to farmers' markets. They hosted her sister for dinner, laughing over burned garlic bread. They watched old movies on rainy nights, her feet tucked beneath his thigh on the couch. But there was still something Alina hadn't asked. One evening, while they folded laundry in the living room, she finally said it. "Why haven't you ever told me about her?" Aidan looked up. Whoever broke your heart?" He was quiet for a long time, then he set down the shirt he was folding and sat beside her. "Her name was Laurel, we were engaged. She died before we ever got married." Alina stilled. "I didn't know. I don't talk about her much, not because I'm hiding her, but because grief isn't a single wound, it's a language you learn to speak quietly." He looked at her, eyes steady. "But she's part of who I am, and so is this. You now, loving again didn't erase anything, it just made room." Alina felt her throat tighten. "I don't want to be the woman you move on from," she whispered. "You're not," he said, "you're the woman I moved toward." She closed her eyes for a moment, then lined in, and he was there, open, present, real. Some people leave scars, some people build bridges, and some learn to do both. When the magazine issue finally came out, Alina didn't read it right away. She picked it up at the corner bookstore, flipped past the cover with her photo, herself, sitting in her garden, knees mud-stained, eyes forward. She skimmed through the pages in her car, heart thudding. But it wasn't until she was back home, sitting barefoot on the porch with Aidan beside her, that she really read it. He didn't say a word while she turned the pages. When she finished, she set it in her lap and stared out at the yard, where the lavender bent gently in the breeze. "Well," he asked. "I think I told the truth," she said. He nodded. "You did." She looked at him. "It's strange. I always thought survival would feel like some kind of finish line. And no." She exhaled, slow and deep. "It feels like a beginning." Aidan slid his arm around her and she leaned into it, no hesitation. "You know," he said, "I think falling in love with you has been the most unexpected grace of my life." She turned to him. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to let someone close again." He kissed her temple. "That's the thing, Elle, you didn't have to be ready, you just had to be willing." She smiled, blinking against the soft pressure behind her eyes. "And you," she asked, "you ever think about what this is?" He looked at her, calm and sure. "I think it's love, and I think it's worth whatever it took to get here." That night they danced in her kitchen. No music, no raisin. She reached for his hand while the kettle boiled, and he pulled her close, laughing quietly as she moved against him, still a little off balance, still not perfect. But that wasn't what mattered. He held her like she was something he knew how to keep safe, but never needed to control, and Alina let herself be held. For the first time, it didn't feel like surrender. It felt like freedom. September brought a softness that only came after something had been broken and mended. The light shifted, golden and forgiving, and Alina woke each morning with a little more calm in her breath, a little less fear in her bones. She wasn't fixed, that was never the goal. But she was here. And so was Aidan. The town began to change around them. Leaves rustled in hesitant bursts of color. The first chilly mornings crept in. The bakery down the street put out pumpkin scones. Her sister started knitting again and left half-finished scarves on Alina's porch swing. Life had found its rhythm, not flashy or loud, but deeply real. Alina was shooting again, not full-time, not the way she used to, but steadily, intentionally. She started offering portraits for local families, not posed but honest ones, a mother brushing her daughter's hair, an elderly couple sitting in matching chairs, ankles touching. The kind of images people might glance at years later and remember how it felt to be held by time. Aidan came with her sometimes, not to help though he did, or to be included, but just to be near. He had his own life, still worked with patience, still built furniture when the ache of memory crept in too deep to sit still. They didn't orbit each other. They walked side by side. One Saturday, she asked him to drive her to the cliffs at Cape Thorn. She hadn't been there since before the accident. It was where she used to go when she needed to feel small in the best kind of way. She packed sandwiches, he brought tea in a thermos. They didn't say much during the drive, just listened to the windows down wind and an old playlist she'd forgotten she loved. When they reached the overlook, she stood at the edge, no cane, no brace, and looked out over the sea, wide and endless. It used to terrify me, she said quietly, that I'd never stand here again. Aiden stood a step behind, not crowding her, just present. But here you are, he said. She nodded. I don't think I need to chase the world anymore. Why not? Because I've finally built something worth staying for. He touched her shoulder, slow and steady. You built it yourself. She turned to him then, something vulnerable and sure blooming across her face. Not alone. They sat on the grass afterward, passing the thermos back and forth. When the sun began to dip, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, framed photo. The one she'd taken of him months ago, bent over a beam of wood, light kissing the side of his face like it knew something she didn't yet. She handed it to him. He blinked. I didn't know you printed this. You helped me remember how to see again, she said. It felt right. He ran his fingers over the frame. You helped me remember how to feel again. She laughed softly, eyes wet. Look at us, messes and miracles. He set the frame down and reached for her face, cupping her cheek with both hands. I love you, Alina, he said. I've loved you through every stumble, every silence, every story you've been brave enough to tell. Her breath caught, even the parts I didn't tell you. Especially those. The kiss this time wasn't shy or uncertain. It was the kind of kiss people give when they know what they've been given, not a second chance, not a rescue. A choice, a life. That winter, they hosted Christmas together. It was small, just her sister, a few neighbors, one of Aiden's old army friends who'd quietly moved into town. The living room was full of laughter and candlelight, and Alina, in thick socks and a sweater older than her niece, took a quiet moment by the fireplace to breathe it all in. Aiden came over and slipped an arm around her waist. Everything okay? She nodded against his chest. It's more than okay. They watched her sister play the piano, her niece singing off-key and grinning. Snow began to fall outside the window, soft as forgiveness. Aiden leaned close. What do you want next? Alina thought about it, then turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. Nothing more, she said, just this, just more of this. And she meant it. Not because she was settling, but because for the first time in her life, enough didn't feel like a compromise. It felt like a promise, a fullness, a quiet kind of joy that asked for nothing more than presence. He kissed her temple, and they stayed there, wrapped in warmth and the slow beat of a heart no longer afraid to be held. Years from now, someone would ask how they met. And she'd smile and say, I was learning how to walk again. Turns out I learned how to love at the same time. Because the truth was simple. She thought she was too broken for love, until the man who taught her to move again showed her that hearts, too, could be rebuilt. Not by fixing, but by staying, by choosing, by carrying what mattered gently, and never letting go.